Aegon's Conquest. The maesters of the Citadel who keep the histories of Westeros have used Aegon's Conquest as their touchstone for the past 300 years. Births, deaths, battles, and other events are dated either AC after the conquest, or BC before the conquest. True scholars know that such dating is far from precise. Aegon Targaryen's conquest of the Seven Kingdoms did not take place in a single day. More than 2 years passed between Aegon's landing and his Aldtown coronation. And even then the conquest remained incomplete, since Dorne remained unsubdued. Sporadic attempts to bring the Dornishmen into the realm continued all through King Aegon's reign and well into the reigns of his sons, making it impossible to fix a precise end date for the Wars of Conquest. Even the start date is a matter of some misconception. Many assume, wrongly, that the reign of King Aegon I Targaryen began on the day he landed at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush, beneath the 3 hills where the city of King's Landing would eventually stand. Not so. The day of Aegon's landing was celebrated by the king and his descendants, but the conqueror actually dated the start of his reign from the day he was crowned and anointed in the starry sept of Aldtown by the High Septon of the Faith. This coronation took place 2 years after Aegon's landing, well after all 3 of the major battles of the Wars of Conquest had been fought and won. Thus it can be seen that most of Aegon's actual conquering took place from 2 to 1 BC, before the conquest. The Targaryens were of pure Valyrian blood, dragonlords of ancient lineage. 12 years before the doom of Valyria, 114 BC, Aenar Targaryen sold his holdings in the freehold and the lands of the Long Summer, and moved with all his wives, wealth, slaves, dragons, siblings, kin, and children to Dragonstone, a bleak island citadel beneath a smoking mountain in the narrow sea. At its apex Valyria was the greatest city in the known world, the center of civilization. Within its shining walls, 20 rival houses vied for power and glory in court and council, rising and falling in an endless, subtle, oft savage struggle for dominance. The Targaryens were far from the most powerful of the Dragonlords, and their rivals saw their flight to Dragonstone as an act of surrender, as cowardice. But Lord Aenar's maiden daughter Daenys, known forever afterward as Daenys the Dreamer, had foreseen the destruction of Valyria by fire. And when the doom came 12 years later, the Targaryens were the only Dragonlords to survive. Dragonstone had been the westernmost outpost of Valyrian power for 2 centuries. Its location athwart the gullet gave its lords a stranglehold on Blackwater Bay and enabled both the Targaryens and their close allies, the Velaryons of Driftmark, a lesser house of Valyrian descent, to fill their coffers off the passing trade. Velaryon ships, along with those of another allied Valyrian house, the Celtigars of Claw Isle, dominated the middle reaches of the narrow sea, whilst the Targaryens ruled the skies with their dragons. Yet even so, for the best part of 100 years after the doom of Valyria, the rightly named Century of Blood, House Targaryen looked east, not west, and took little interest in the affairs of Westeros. Daemon Targaryen, brother and husband to Daenys the Dreamer, followed Aenar the Exile as Lord of Dragonstone, and became known as Daemon the Glorious. Daemon's son Aegon and his daughter Alaina ruled together after his death. After them the lordship passed to their son Maeghan, his brother Aerys, and Aerys's sons, Aelix, Balon, and Demian. The last of the 3 brothers was Demian, whose son Aerion then succeeded to Dragonstone. The Aegon who would be known to history as Aegon the Conqueror and Aegon the Dragon was born on Dragonstone in 27 BC. He was the only son, and second child, of Aerion, Lord of Dragonstone, and Lady Valyna of House Velaryon, herself half Targaryen on her mother's side. Aegon had 2 true-born siblings, an elder sister, Visenya, and a younger sister, Rhaenys. It had long been the custom amongst the Dragonlords of Valyria to wed brother to sister, to keep the bloodlines pure, but Aegon took both his sisters to bride. By tradition, he would have been expected to wed only his older sister, Visenya. The inclusion of Rhaenys as a second wife was unusual, though not without precedent. It was said by some that Aegon wed Visenya out of duty and Rhaenys out of desire. All 3 siblings had shown themselves to be Dragonlords before they wed. Of the 5 dragons who had flown with Aenar the Exile from Valyria, only one survived to Aegon's day, the great beast called Balerion, the Black Dread. The dragons Vhagar and Meryxes were younger, hatched on Dragonstone itself. A common myth, oft heard amongst the ignorant, claims that Aegon Targaryen had never set foot upon the soil of Westeros until the day he set sail to conquer it, but this cannot be truth. Years before that, sailing, the painted table had been carved and decorated at Lord Aegon's command, a massive slab of wood, some 50 feet long, carved in the shape of Westeros, and painted to show all the woods and rivers, and towns and castles of the Seven Kingdoms. Plainly, Aegon's interest in Westeros long predated the events that drove him to war. As well, there are reliable reports of Aegon and his sister Visenya visiting the citadel of Aldtown in their youth, and hawking on the arbor as guests of Lord Redwyn. He may have visited Lannisport as well, accounts differ. The Westeros of Aegon's youth was divided into 7 quarrelsome kingdoms, and there was hardly a time when 2 or 3 of these kingdoms were not at war with one another. The vast, cold, stony north was ruled by the Starks of Winterfell. In the deserts of Dorne, the Martell princes held sway. The gold-rich Westerlands were ruled by the Lannisters of Castley Rock, the fertile reach by the Gardeners of Highgarden. The Vale, the Fingers, and the Mountains of the Moon belonged to House Arryn. But the most belligerent kings of Aegon's time were the 2 whose realms lay closest to Dragonstone, Harren the Black and Argilac the Arrogant. From their great citadel, Storm's End, the Storm Kings of House Durrandon had once ruled the eastern half of Westeros, from Cape Wrath to the Bay of Crabs, but their powers had been dwindling for centuries. The kings of the Reach had nibbled at their domains from the west, the Dornishmen harassed them from the south, and Harren the Black and his Ironmen had pushed them from the Trident and the lands north of the Blackwater Rush. King Argilac, last of the Durrandon, had arrested this decline for a time, turning back a Dornish invasion whilst still a boy, crossing the narrow sea to join the Great Alliance against the imperialist Tigers of Volantis, and slaying Garth Seven Gardener, king of the Reach, in the Battle of Summerfield 20 years later. But Argilac had grown older, his famous mane of black hair had gone gray, and his prowess at arms had faded. North of the Blackwater, the Riverlands were ruled by the bloody hand of Harren the Black of House Hoare, king of the Isles and the Rivers. Harren's iron-born grandsire, Harwin Hardhand, had taken the trident from Argilac's grandsire, Urek, whose own forebears had thrown down the last of the River Kings centuries earlier. Harren's father had extended his domains east to Duskendale and Rosby. Harren himself had devoted most of his long reign, close on 40 years, to building a gigantic castle beside the God's Eye, but with Harrenhal at last nearing completion, the Ironborn would soon be free to seek fresh conquests. No king in Westeros was more feared than Black Harren, whose cruelty had become legendary all through the Seven Kingdoms. And no king in Westeros felt more threatened than Argilac the Storm King, last of the Durrandon, an aging warrior whose only heir was his maiden daughter. Thus it was that King Argilac reached out to the Targaryens on Dragonstone, offering Lord Aegon his daughter in marriage, with all the lands east of the God's Eye from the Trident to the Blackwater Rush as her dowry. Aegon Targaryen spurned the Storm King's proposal. He had 2 wives, he pointed out, he did not need a third. And the dower lands being offered had belonged to Harrenhal for more than a generation. They were not Argilac's to give. Plainly, the aging Storm King meant to establish the Targaryens along the Blackwater as a buffer between his own lands and those of Harren the Black. The Lord of Dragonstone countered with an offer of his own. He would take the dower lands being offered if Argilac would also cede Massey's Hook and the woods and plains from the Blackwater south to the River Wendwater and the headwaters of the Mander. The pact would be sealed by the marriage of Argilac's daughter to Orys Baratheon, Lord Aegon's childhood friend and champion. These terms Argilac the Arrogant rejected angrily. Orys Baratheon was a baseborn half-brother to Lord Aegon, it was whispered, and the Storm King would not dishonor his daughter by giving her hand to a bastard. The very suggestion enraged him. Argilac had the hands of Aegon's envoy cut off and returned to him in a box. "These are the only hands your bastard shall have of me," he wrote. Aegon made no reply. Instead he summoned his friends, bannermen, and principal allies to attend him on Dragonstone. Their numbers were small. The Valerians of Driftmark were sworn to House Targaryen, as were the Celtigars of Claw Isle. From Massey's Hook came Lord Bar Emmon of Sharp Point and Lord Massey of Stoneadens, both sworn to Storm's End, but with closer ties to Dragonstone. Lord Aegon and his sisters took counsel with them, and visited the castle sept to pray to the Seven of Westeros as well, though he had never before been accounted a pious man. On the 7th day, a cloud of ravens burst from the towers of Dragonstone to bring Lord Aegon's word to the 7 kingdoms of Westeros. To the 7 kings they flew, to the citadel of Aldtown, to lords both great and small. All carried the same message: From this day forth there would be but one king in Westeros. Those who bent the knee to Aegon of House Targaryen would keep their lands and titles. Those who took up arms against him would be thrown down, humbled, and destroyed.